The All Dress Podcast with Conor McKenna, Eric Macramella, and Sean Starr starts now.
Is the intro over? Maybe we've got this figured out. It's a new episode of the All Dress Podcast. Conor, Eric, Sean, everybody's here. No replacements. Nice to be with you. We're just removed from the Canadiens' big win over the Winnipeg Jets. Perhaps a season-defining win against the Jets on a Monday night in Winnipeg. It felt important, and they came out and they showed up on Monday night. How's everybody doing? Any housekeeping? Anything to report?
Well, not any house. I just want to say that, yes, the Canadiens winning is nice, but I'm just happy because in the morning, I can tell my two young boys, Daniel was 7, Nikki was 4, the Canadiens won because I got so sick and tired that they would come to my room in the morning after game and say, Daddy, who won? And then I would say the other team, and they would drop their head in sadness. So thank you, the Canadiens, for winning. We watched all the highlights this morning, watched it twice. My kids love Toffoli. We all agreed Toffoli was designed to play hockey.
Are they confused at all? Like, Daddy, what happened to our favorite team? They lost. Daddy, what happened? They won. Daddy, what happened? They lost. I mean, are any of them just like, what is going on here with this team? Why are we cheering for such a mediocre to subpar team sometimes?
That's how it was last season before the Canadiens went into the bubble. And then the bubble just rejuvenated our entire family. And it was electrifying. And then this year, off to a great start. We were throwing parties, having a great time. And then, lo and behold, February shows up. And then, yes, Daniel, my 7-year-old, is like, Daddy, they're not really very good. But he kept saying, but Daddy, we stand by them. We stand by them. It's kind of funny. My kids were at Chapters and they were wearing their Canadiens masks. And a man came up to them and said, oh, who's your favorite player? And Daniel kind of thought about it before he had a chance to respond. He goes, oh, is it the goalie, Carey Price? And he goes, well, Carey Price is struggling. He's still good, though. But my favorite players are Toffoli, Anderson, Gallagher, Weber, and Suzuki in order. And the guy was like all quiet. He just walked away.
Hey, Weber made the cut. Weber made the cut. Amazing.
We love Weber.
Good.
How about you guys?
What do you mean?
I don't have a favorite player anymore.
Anything to report?
Yeah. Oh, I see. I don't have any children. My house is ready. All the rooms are done. I've been living here for 2 months, so it's been a long work in progress. But I got the new TV mounted on the wall in the basement, sound bar under it, the couch, the recliner, everything's set up. I am now ready.
Yeah, I think I live with a vindictive dog. My girlfriend put a little pepperoni dog treat in one of his chew toys. And she kind of like left it there in his mouth so that when Leon would come back in the house, he would see it and eat it, right? But then he ate the pepperoni. And then right afterwards, he decided to absolutely destroy it. And this is a toy he's never destroyed before. He decapitated this poor rubber ducky. And I'm thinking to myself, he's bitter that this chew toy was hiding toys on him. So he decided to take it all out. And that's what he did yesterday. It was a very concerning moment in my house for my dog.
Okay, well, hopefully he's able to listen. Maybe he's going through a phase right now. Things are weird. It's springtime, right? Mm-hmm. It's at least starting to really feel like it. The clocks just went forward. Eric's in Ottawa. Sean and I are both in Montreal, where we have, although there was some cold periods the last 48 hours, we've had some real spring weather in the last couple of days or the last couple of weeks even. More to come. And it makes me wonder, right? Because they're talking about the curfews going later in Montreal. It's been 8 p.m. Now they're moving it to 9:30 p.m. Other restrictions apparently are being lifted. And I do wonder, if from the Canadian standpoint, how important it is for them to win some games here. Because we're getting into a place where the weather's going to get better. People are going to be more willing to go outside. There's going to be more options to do other things. I do think it's important that they go on a run here of some level of sustained success. They're 4-3-3 now in the Dominic Ducharme era. We've got a 10-game sample size to look at. The good news is they've got points in 7 out of 10 games. That's very good. That's normally good enough to be a playoff team in the NHL. The bad news is they've just 4 wins in the 10 games since Ducharme took over. The latest, though, was a regulation win against the Jets last night. So I wanted to start with that. 4-2 is your score. Lots of positives in this game, including a great job on the forecheck by the Canadiens. Special teams look good. And maybe most of all, Carey Price looked like a superstar goaltender in the Canadiens' net.
Yeah, and you look at Carey Price and his performance in that win in Winnipeg on Monday night, and my honest to God gut feel is it's more of the same. It's the same old, same old. Like the growing pains are the growing pains for the younger players. And while the veterans are going to be there, and I would say they've been pretty consistent in the 10 games, certainly under Dominic Ducharme, that it's how Carey Price plays is how the team will play. And sure, they can collect points in these overtime or shootout losses. But when you look at the 898 save percentage in January, the 880 in February, and the 950 in March, it's been this way my entire life looking at this club. The goaltender is the be-all, end-all to the team's success. And I don't see that changing anytime soon. And that's great news for the Canadiens because that means they should coast into the playoffs if this guy keeps it up in the second half.
You know, it's kind of funny how the former goaltending coach Stefan Way predicted that Carey Price would have a good March. I mean, Carey Price right now, the save percentage for goaltenders who have played 3 games or more in March, he has the top save percentage in the league. And that to me is a huge deal because we're looking at a far different Carey Price. We're also looking at a slightly different Canadiens team. We're looking at forwards that are lending more support in the defensive zone. Like yesterday, you watched the game, you saw Tatar and Byron down low helping their D transition out rather than leave their D kind of alone deep in their zone. And we know that's kind of been an issue for this defensive core. That was good to see. It's also great to see Romanov, who honestly, at one point under Julien's regime, looked completely lost on the ice. I joked on Twitter, the guy was skating around with a map. He is trending back in the right direction. Not only that, but we're starting to see a player who's more confident, Shaun and Conor, and a player who's more difficult to play against, and a player who, when he hits you, or even when you hit him, it tends to hurt. So I like what I'm seeing with this team, guys. This team is trending in the right direction.
So, but let's just also say that what we saw from this team on Saturday night was concerning a little bit, was it not? In both these situations, I felt like Saturday was going to be an important game for this team based on the way things went in that Calgary game, the quote-unquote scheduled loss that we talked about on last Thursday night. They had a day to get ready to adjust to the time and the place that they were in. And then, woof, that was a brutal game they played on Saturday night. Outshot 16-6 in the first period. Price was the only guy, it seemed to me at least, who kind of showed up for that game and got kind of hung out to dry a little bit by his teammates. So any concern there? I mean, I don't want to get too high or too low either way. It was extremely, it was heartening to see the way that they responded on Monday night. But what about that performance on Saturday?
I think it is a bit of a red flag, and that's where I guess I slightly disagree with Eric's perspective. I mean, I can appreciate the glass half full approach, but like everything that was said about the game against Winnipeg on Monday night, we could have said about the first month of the season. Oh, look how good Romanov plays. He's like a seasoned veteran. No, they're scoring. It's consistent. Look at the effort. And then it dipped, and now it's back again. And to see the game and the effort on Saturday night is extremely, extremely concerning. It's like, for real, like everything that you said about, the schedule makers set them up to lose that game on Thursday. They had the rest day, and then they were going right back at it, knowing that they were expecting to get punched in the mouth. And that's, to me, where the red flag really emerges here is the Canadiens expected it. We all expected it. We don't live in their world, but we knew it was coming. And when they got pushed back severely, it's not like Calgary plays a complicated game. Dump it in, pressure on the man, pressure on the puck carrier, and that's it. That's all. And the Canadiens had nothing for that.
But that's a game that they have struggled against. I mean, that sounds like DJ Smith's Ottawa Senators. It's what Calgary did there. It's not kill you with your best players. It's not complicated. It's not fancy, but it is effective against Claude Julien's Canadiens, and it appears that it's effective against Dominic Ducharme's Canadiens as well, does it not?
Yeah, look, guys, this whole notion that the Canadiens were tired, I don't buy it. Every team is. I haven't slept since 2012, since my first kid was born. Everybody's tired. Every NHL team is playing in a pandemic schedule. February was the red flag. There's no doubt about that. But when I see how the team is playing today, they seem to be getting their legs back a little bit. Their D seems to be a little bit more stable. And it seems like there are more positives than negatives as a result of the past 2 games. But here's the thing, guys, is
2 games.
When the Canadiens are were playing as poorly as they were playing, you look for any positives. And so when you're watching these games, I do see players that seem to be playing a little bit better. The Canadians are a little more aggressive on the forecheck. The key to their success is using their speed, is an aggressive forecheck. They have to engage teams in that way, or they are simply going to fail.
Well, the true key to this team's success, I mean, is going to be based on these kids not, being as inconsistent as they've been, which is, I suppose, probably an unreasonable ask. And there's no doubt, and we've said it a few times already on our podcast together, that, Jesperi Kotkaniemi, Romanov, Jonathan Drouin are completely different players in my eyes under the watch of Dominic Ducharme in the last 10 games. And if you're looking for consistency, I think you could bring up a larger sample size than just what you saw in Winnipeg or maybe some of it Saturday against Calgary, is how consistent Jesperi Kotkaniemi. And you see how often he's shooting the puck now from all these different angles. Like, he knows he has a heavy shot. I actually think he believes he has a heavy shot, and he's been told to use it. And I think if we're looking for something outside of Carey Price for this team to latch onto and to actually generate momentum, I do think it's going to be based on how well Jesperi Kotkaniemi delivers and his line mates.
And it does. It reminds me, I was thinking of when we were talking about Carey Price and the way that he appears to have turned his season around. The fact that Jake Allen, if you look, the sample size isn't big, but since Carey Price has turned it around, all of a sudden Jake Allen is at like an .893 save percentage. I'm sure it's just a coincidence, but it is funny how these things happen. And it reminds me a little bit when you talk about Kotkaniemi, about Nick Suzuki. Now, Kotkaniemi, nobody's going to argue that he doesn't deserve right now to have Jake Allen and Jonathan Drouin as his wingers, making up what is the most exciting and probably the best line that the Canadians had in that game against Winnipeg. And I'd like to see him keep those line mates for a while. But it does beg the question about Nick Suzuki, which I'll spring on you guys, but I'm sure you have thoughts on, is what's going on with Suzuki because of the fact that he was a point-a-game player for the first dozen or so games this season. The last, I guess now we're talking 16 or so games, have been a really, really different story for him. The positivity surrounding him, look, it's not as if, I don't think anybody's saying it's a disaster. We're worried about Nick Suzuki's long-term future, so much as maybe what one does with a younger player, and that is adjust how you evaluate what he might be when he really does hit his ceiling as an NHL player. And he's probably somewhere between what he is right now and what he was in that first month of the season. But how are you approaching the season, the up and down season that Nick Suzuki has had so far?
Conor and Shaun, it takes NHL players typically 2 to 3 years to develop. It took Guy Lafleur 3 years to really blossom into the player he was going to be. Suzuki he's not only young, but he's also a centerman. And with that comes added responsibility. So what we're seeing with him, these are just growing pains. What we know about Suzuki is he's a really smart player. He's got really soft hands, great vision on the ice, has got a reasonably good shot. This is a guy that has the tools to be an effective, say, second line type center in the NHL, or 1.5 line type of centerman, if you know what I mean. He has the tools to be an effective hockey player, but he's young, guys. He's young. And the issue with fans in Montreal, and fans typically, is that they tend to make these snap judgments about players when it takes typically players time to develop. Not everybody is going to be Connor McDavid. Not everybody is going to be Sidney Crosby. Most players are Suzuki.
Well, that's the thing. Like, and it is problematic, I guess, in the market. And it is the organization's fault. I mean, they have an awful track record of developing players. So I get the argument about, well, just bring them up with the pros, let the pros and the NHL coaches kind of teach these guys. But I think you're on the money, Eric. I think the reality is that Nick Suzuki is not a generational player. It's not a slight on the guy. He's not an offense driver right now. And I think if there's a single player on this roster, and you can even go back to previous players that no longer play here. I mean, if there's one player that deserves, I guess, a strong element of trust, knowing that he's going to work his way out of this and figure it out and be a really good NHL player. For me, it's a no doubter. It's Nick Suzuki. Like, I know I'm not a hockey scout. Like, I don't dislike anything about this guy's game. I think he does everything very, very well. It's a matter of just figuring it out. Like, we talk to a whole bunch of NHL insiders regularly, Conor and I, on the TSN 690 morning show. And it's like, yeah, he's got to learn. He has to learn where to position his body, stick checks, when to pick a fight, when to avoid it, so on and so forth. And all this stuff will only come with experience. And unfortunately for the fans, they have to live through it in real time in a rabid market where if you go 4 or 5 games and you're a player that's expected to provide offense and you don't, man, you're going to absolutely hear it. Unfair or not, it's just the reality.
But you become a victim of your own expectations, the expectations you create for yourself. Sometimes it's fair, sometimes it isn't. But the fact is, Nick Suzuki was arguably the Canadians' best forward during the bubble last year. Now, I realize you don't want to put too much into that, but still, it's something. Those were important games, the most important games this franchise has played in 5 years. And then at the beginning of this season, he was as good as he was. So as much as I want to be on sort of Eric's side here with, oh yeah, it's going to be fine, you're being impatient, just give it time, wait it out. I think I've seen enough here in Montreal now over the course of my time covering and watching this team of that sort of attitude of, no, they'll figure it out. Oh, maybe he's a winger, maybe he's a center, they'll figure it out. Whatever it is, whether it's a defenseman, yeah, I know he's being put on an accelerated development curve and it's going to be fine. It's not, guys. Sorry, it's not a foregone conclusion that Nick Suzuki, it's just everything's going to be okay one day and he's just going to realize his potential. It's a lot more complicated than that. And the thing, and I know that I'm a broken record on this too, it's consistency. It's finding consistency. And that's not something that happens overnight. That might be that might be a matter of finding the right trainer to work with. That might be a matter of finding the right nutritionist to get him on the kind of cycle he wants to be. It might be a sports psychologist who gets him in the right headspace. It might be the right power play coach in Alex Burrows who wants to give him an opportunity. It might be the right coach in Dominic Ducharme who gives him the right opportunities and makes him feel the right way. But that's a lot of variables. And like, maybe I'm wrong about this, but I think in becoming a consistent performer in the modern NHL. And I think for Nick Suzuki, that means being a 70 to 80 point player in a season. It's not just going to happen all of a sudden.
But Conor, let me ask you this. How many people wrote off Kotkaniemi last season? And then suddenly he popped. He had a modest pop, but he popped a bit. And then we are now awaiting the more significant pop. And we know what's going to happen with Kotkaniemi because he's so incredibly talented, has all these tools. We know a good hockey player when we see one. Kotkaniemi is a good hockey player. I look at Suzuki. This is a good hockey player and one that can produce at this level. How he played the tail end of last season was not a fluke. This was a function of his skill set. He can get back there. And if we keep talking in this way, in a negative way, that is not going to do him any favors.
Well, why would that be perceived as negative? I'm curious to talk about a thing that's happened, right? He had 12 points in the first 12 games. He's got like 6 points in the 18 games since then. That's not being negative. That's just saying a thing that's true.
Yeah. I think the negative thing, people could take it as negative is you saying that, well, maybe he's not who we thought he was. We don't think maybe. Well, that's what you're suggesting is that, well, maybe he's the guy that's not a point per game guy. He's a guy that maybe is not going to produce.
Hey, you know what? So let me take exception to that sort of lazy characterization of what I'm saying here. Asking a question about something is not being negative, and talking about a thing that's going on isn't being negative either. It's just merely talking about what's going on. Saying that Carey Price was having a difficult time during the months of January and February was not being negative. It was just saying the truth about what the situation was. I'm not trying to be negative here. I'm trying to be real about what we've seen with players coming along.
I guess the point I'm making, Conor, is I think that
Jonathan Drouin,
you are laying down an indictment of Suzuki that is premature. That's the sense that I'm getting.
I didn't get that sense at all.
Where's the indictment? Where's the indictment?
It was what you had said, that maybe this is not the player we saw in the bubble, what we've seen over the past 10 games. Maybe this is Suzuki.
Yeah, but the one issue there, if we're going to cherry pick, like the one issue that I don't see the way Conor described it, and feel free to jump in if I misquote or take anything out of context, is that like when we talk about other players and you talk about other players that have fluctuated, they're playing the wing, they're playing center, like at no point ever was Nick Suzuki's position, I think, called into question. Like PK Subban, there was some hesitancy for some people to extend this guy. Alex Galchenyuk, you wondered about him. You wondered about Jonathan Drouin, another guy. When he came here, he wanted to be the good guy and play center. Didn't really work out. And all three of those players, I don't think we ever talked about them as cerebral players. I think Nick Suzuki is a consistent player at his position. And I think he's a very smart player at his position. And that ultimately, I choose to believe that he will get there. And that it is a matter of time. And I think it's vastly different than the other players that maybe we would have said that about. Oh, hold on, wait a second. They'll figure it out. I think Nick Suzuki is in a different category as a player than some of those other guys.
Yeah, I think, sure. What I definitely never said was that this guy needs to be Connor McDavid, nor suggest that he should be Sidney Crosby or anything like that.
Well, if there's only one of those people in the world,
I'm merely pointing out that so far in his career as an NHL player, he has shown that he can be a guy who is a dominant player. Literally, it's what he was. He was dominating at the beginning of this season.
Yeah.
But he's just as frequently been, I'm not going to say, it's because the thing about Suzuki that you can't say that maybe you could say about these other guys is you very rarely will notice Nick Suzuki for the wrong reasons, right? Like, another egregious giveaway, or I can't believe that he chose to do X in this situation that led to a bad goal, right? That's not the type of thing that happens to him. But like I'm saying here, it's just maybe this is me being negative. I just, the way that I see it is asking a question about a guy who has looked so good at times, that he's looked like the best player on the team. Mm-hmm. And then just as frequently in his career so far, he has been just one of the guys, just a guy who's in the pack. And I think it's a fair question. And I don't think it's being negative necessarily to ask how he gets to the place where he is that guy who's one of their better players night in, night out.
And is it also fair to point out that it's a different year for him? It's a different role. It's a different level of responsibility. Like when the Canadians were doing their thing in the bubble and taking care of Pittsburgh and being competitive against Philadelphia, like Phil Deneau was still getting heavy minutes. Phil Deneau was still getting big assignments. And now I think the tables have completely turned this year, especially so under Dominic Ducharme, where Nick Suzuki's minutes and Phil Deneau's minutes have kind of dropped off, right? And Phil Deneau's role has kind of dropped off a little bit compared to what it was. So like if we bring in baseball, and I've brought this up before, like the second, third time through the order, and now you get tougher assignments regularly, it makes life that much more challenging for Nick Suzuki because it's just not the same as it was in the bubble.
I think we've talked about Suzuki enough. I want to throw something out at you guys about another player on the Canadians. I watched last night and something occurred to me. And it's a player who I respect more than I did last season throughout his career, and that's Jonathan Drouin. What I've noticed is he in danger of becoming Scott Gomez 2.0, a neutral zone specialist, great hands, terrific passing, who doesn't score very much?
That would be a negative assessment.
Is it negative, or am I just trying to speak the truth? I'm just curious what your views are. This is a guy that has 2 goals, has been playing really well this season. Scott Gomez was a really good hockey player. He did certain things really, really well. I'm just wondering, is this the type of player that we should expect?
Yeah, I want to be nice to Jonathan Drouin. He does get kicked around quite a bit. I don't know. We've poked some fun at the guy. What's the 16th today? His goal anniversary is coming up. So I think you're accurate, man. I think he is Scott Gomez 2.0. I think he's a beautiful skater. I think he carries the puck. And after that, puck it on shows. There's really not much going on as far as the rarity of the offensive threats from Jonathan Drouin. This guy's played enough hockey. I'm going to call it. He's Scott Gomez 2.0. Eric's got it right.
Thank you.
One of their 5 best players, 5 best forwards on the team. So I don't know. Who you guys are watching, but I think that, we're all guilty of sort of having our own prejudices and sort of agendas when it comes to this sort of thing. I think it's ridiculous to compare this guy to Scott Gomez. I think that's insane.
I have to say, I really am enjoying how dogmatic you are today. But I don't think it's ridiculous. I don't know if that's a fair assessment. And why would it be seen as a criticism? Scott Gomez was a beautiful skater, and a great passer. Didn't have a great shot.
No. Come on.
What are we doing here?
Come on, Eric. That's not right.
I mean, it's just so disingenuous. I just it's honestly I love it. I find it to be tremendously irritating. Scott Gomez, a punchline, is the end of a punchline. Yes. He's a walking punchline. Yes.
Why?
His career as a Montreal Canadian.
And is Jonathan Drouin not going to be the next version of that? Does he not have the potential to be the next version of that? Come on.
Why would he be? I mean,
because he's got all the talent in the world, Conor, and he does nothing with it.
I don't agree. You say he does nothing with it. He has been consistently performing, but it's like you want to nitpick. He's
got 2 goals, Conor.
So you're so focused on the 2 goals, you can't let that go that you can't see anything else.
They scored 2.6 goals against the rest of the league that isn't the Vancouver Canucks. Tell me that's not a problem.
That's Jonathan Drouin, and that's on Jonathan Drouin.
It is, because you just said he's one of the top 5 forwards on this team. So if he's one of the top 5 forwards on the team, you better deliver.
There's a lot more to being a good NHL player than there is than just scoring goals. We all know this. I think it's a gross oversimplification. And if there's a criticism of his game, I mean, I'm trying to think, is there a lot of times this year that I was like, man, I wish Drouin had shot that puck instead of passed it? I can't say it's happened that much. I've seen Jonathan Drouin make very, very good, smart plays with the puck. I haven't seen him be soft on the puck. I've seen him be engaged this season in a way that I haven't seen, especially under Dominic Ducharme this year. I think he deserved a penalty shot in that Jets game that he would have had a much better shot at scoring on than Brendan Gallagher did. But at the end of the day, was he a net positive for the Canadians in that game? For me, absolutely.
You know, guys, I do find it interesting.
And sorry, let me just also say that he has been a part of what has been the Canadians' best line wire to wire so far this season. In some way, shape, or form, that line has included Jonathan Drouin.
Can I ask you a question?
Ask Josh Anderson what he thinks about Jonathan Drouin and the game that he's played with, the player that he's played more with than anybody else.
That's fair.
It's this. What I find interesting is the statement that I made comparing him to Scott Gomez is received by you, Conor, as a criticism, and Shaun maybe sees it the same way. Then it wasn't intended as a criticism as much as it was an observation. Scott Gomez had a bum rap in part because of his contract, his AAV, and also who he was traded for. And he played on a team that was offensively incapable. Let's just put it that way. I look at Drouin. I mean, he's playing well this season. He's forechecking. He's back-checking. He's a beautiful skater. All I am saying, Conor, is that expectation with Drouin, maybe when he arrived, wasn't entirely on the mark. And this is a player that has a certain skill set. I think we are seeing it now. And it does not include scoring goals.
I think it's a bad comparison. I'm sorry. I think Scott Gomez was 30 something years old when the Canadians brought him in. We already knew that his best days were probably behind him to begin with.
No, you're not wrong. It's a punchline joke. It totally is.
Something else that I would suggest is that people want to forget this. The first year Scott Gomez got here, the Canadians went to the conference finals. He was outstanding for them in both the playoff rounds that they won and had a pretty good regular season as well. But as far as they gave up a top prospect, a top defensive prospect to acquire the guy, I'd say that they have that in common. But are people really complaining about Jonathan Drouin's contract? Sounds like a bad faith argument to me. Kind of makes $5.5 million a year. I mean, who cares?
And look, I mean, one of the more positive things that's come out of this season is basically what people have said about Jonathan Drouin off the ice. I mean, that's the praise I keep hearing. Oh, look how confident it is. Matter of fact, it holds nothing back, gives no cliches. I mean, there's a certain level of expectation. And as I was telling my friend the other day, I wish Jonathan Drouin wasn't as talented. That way, his lack of show-upness sometimes wouldn't bother me as much as it does.
Has there been a lot of that this season for you, for Jonathan Drouin?
Not as much, no. And look, I mean, 10 minutes ago, I just finished praising the guy. I lump him in one of 3 players that I think has benefited quite a bit from Dominic Ducharme's arrival.
And you know what? I mean, when you look at the Habs as a whole this season, he's been one of the bright spots, someone who's showed up every game and has delivered and executed. The only point I'm making is let's just understand the player that we have so that we can be fair and just in the manner in which we evaluate and value him.
But I think most reasonable people are. We know who Jonathan Drouin is. We probably knew who he was before he got here. He's a guy who the best team in the NHL said, thanks, but no thanks. When they were trying to win a Stanley Cup, they said, we don't really want to deal with whatever it is that you're trying to go through right now. Goodbye. You can stay on the outside looking in. And they went and had success even without him, which had to be a tremendously humbling experience for him. And then he had a more tremendously humbling experiences since then, right? Coming in, trying to be the savior at center, being traded for Mikhail Sergachev, being criticized consistently on both the French and English sides of the media. And I think he's come out of it kind of a more mature player. But is it his fault that people sort of expect the things that they expect from him? Is it his fault that people are mad about how much money he makes? It's not a contract that hurts the Canadians. It just seems to me that he's a net positive. I don't know. I find the criticism of him sometimes to be, especially when he's playing as well as he's playing right now. I just feel like I don't really get it.
Let me ask you this, guys. Maybe we go from negative to positive, or seemingly negative to positive. Who do you think this season has been the Habs' best player for this entire season?
Jeff Petrie.
Yeah, easy answer, Jeff Petrie.
Yeah,
and then if it's not Jeff Petrie, it's Tyler Toffoli.
Agreed. Yeah, I would rank Petrie and Toffoli. I have loved watching Tyler Toffoli play this season. He has come as advertised, a great two-way player, really good, in tight with his hands, shoots more than he passes. Canadians could use that, and they have used it to their advantage. He's just, when a lot of players nowadays seem like they were manufactured in a test tube, this guy shows up, looks like he was designed to play hockey. He's an absolute joy as a Canadians fan to watch.
Yeah, and you can sprinkle him on any line. He doesn't seem to need like a grace period to get to know his new centerman. I mean, he's got 17 goals. In an 82-game season, he's prorated to drop a 50 spot. I mean, it's surreal that, it's funny because when we talked about, what Marc Bergevin did and bringing in Josh Anderson and bringing in Tyler Toffoli, I remember talking about the fact that, they basically went out for just under $10 million, bought the potential of 50 combined goals. And it seems like a realistic number now. And no doubt, I mean, if you're looking for consistency from the forward position, I think it does begin with Tyler Toffoli.
If we had told you at the beginning of the season that these two guys were going to be combined for the same number of goals as the Canadians have played games, I mean, you would not have even believed it. And even then, and now I'm thinking about it because Anderson missed a couple of games. So it skews that average a little bit. But you're right. It's an incredible thing. And it does. If I told you at the beginning of the year, these guys would have 28 combined goals in the first 28 games, where are the Canadians in the Canadian division?
First, because Carey Price is great and everything else good. This is just cherries on the sundae, man.
These are like the two greatest offseason acquisitions that the Canadians have ever made. No,
yes. If Drew Brees is the best free agent signing in the history of sports, this is the best free agent signing by the Canadians in Marc Bergevin's life, and it's not close.
Yeah, I mean, Drew Brees is the all-time leader and won a championship. But yes, for now, sure. And Toffoli, you know what I love from Toffoli was that goal last night. He's sweeping in on net. He's got two guys with him. He could very easily dish it off to one of them or try to get fancy. He knows the score. He's a veteran. He's not worried about offending anybody. He's going to finish that play. He knows he can do it. He has the confidence to do it against the reigning Vezina winner. And that's the play that for me kind of won them the game, giving them that 3-1 lead. It was a big moment and a perfect example of the confidence, the savvy, and the finish that Tyler Toffoli brings to the table. For sure.
And Conor, the other thing I would add is what Bergevin did in the offseason. Not only did he acquire these players, he acquired players with Stanley Cup experience. He brought these guys in that have won the Cup, and this matters. I mean, even a guy like Corey Perry, everyone said is done. This guy, he's such a patient player. The game slows to his speed, to his pace. He's got great hands in close. He's made this a tougher team to play against and a better team. So just on whole, you have to love these acquisitions, because he not only acquired players, but he also acquired cups.
Were people saying Corey Perry was done after the run he just had with the Dallas Stars? I mean, I guess NHL general managers might have been, but he was a big part of what they did in the playoffs last year, was he not? Eric, you got a lot of engagement, as you guys call it, on a tweet yesterday saying that Marc Bergevin is fighting for his job. Is that still accurate? I mean, look, we talked on the last episode about the way things went down with Stefan Waite, the things Stefan Waite has said since that date. Even now, do you believe that Marc Bergevin is a general manager who's fighting for his job?
I want to be clear in that I love what he did in the offseason. I've said the guy has been the Canadiens Employee of the Month for 4 or 5 straight months. It's just that he's running out of people to fire. And when you're firing people, you're saying, well, you're to blame, you're to blame, you're to blame. When you fired everybody, you're the last man standing. Maybe you're to blame in the eyes of ownership. I don't think it's a clear-cut case here, but there's an argument to be made that the Canadiens don't make the playoffs with the complement of players that they have, that his job is in danger.
Mm-hmm. Do you think firing Claude Julien was a panic move, Eric?
No, I don't know.
Okay.
I thought that was a reasonable move.
It was because
that resulted in the culture change they needed. You need the young players to feel confident, to feel. I thought it was a really, really good move.
Because I don't see the firing of Stéphane Waite, of Kirk Muller, of Claude Julien as anything panic, anything, oh, I'm looking over my shoulder because Jeff Molson's coming, and he's got the Grim Reaper costume on here and I'm dead. I look at Dominic Ducharme. That's who I listen to. I listen to the new coach of the Canadiens. And after last night, he had a great quote. He did a great job. Unlike Stéphane Waite, he showed a lot of class and didn't throw Claude Julien under the bus. When asked about his role as an assistant and transitioning from assistant to head coach, he said that when he was the assistant to Claude Julien, that Claude Julien would ask around the room, they provide opinions, and ultimately it fell on the lap of the head coach to pull the trigger and make the decision and make the call for the night. Dominic Ducharme basically laid it out that he disagreed with the way Claude Julien operated and moved around and how he strategized game in and game out. And they didn't see it eye to eye. And I think when I look at that and I read that quote and I understand that quote, that's a good general manager. That's a general manager who's got his finger on the pulse, who he's talking to, deciphering what's BS from what isn't BS, and making the smart, educated move. So right now, until Marc Bergevin gives up assets in a lopsided trade where you're like, what's the thinking behind that? Everything he's done off season, in season, to me has been 10 on 10, legitimately.
And Shaun, are you of the view that Canadians have 14 draft picks coming up in the next draft, that you can't possibly integrate 14 players into your organization or your system as a whole? Is this the moment where Bergevin packaged some of these draft picks and tries to get his hands on some assets like a puck-moving defenseman or something like that? I
think so. I don't know, Conor, if he does anything differently. Like, I know for seasons he's been very reluctant to trade away picks to bring in rental players, but based on the bubble, based on his reactions to what his team did in the bubble, you've accumulated all these picks. And if you think you're close to maybe taking second in the North Division, locking down third, like easy, then yeah, you have to unload some of those picks to bring in somebody that I think will obviously help them down the stretch.
I mean, Stéphane Waite said that Marc Bergevin said that he had to fire him, otherwise he was the next guy out, right?
Yeah.
Do we take Waite at his word on that?
I don't. I mean, he didn't provide context of that conversation. So it's either one of two scenarios. Either Bergevin meant it, or he didn't. Whether he did mean it or not, from my standpoint, it doesn't affect the assessment as to whether his job may be in danger. I'm not saying that it is, but it may be in danger simply because he's 9 years in. He hasn't enjoyed a great deal of success as general manager of the Canadiens, and there comes a point in time, just like Bergevin, how he reacted to Julien, we need a change. It's possible ownership may say, look, it's been 9 years. You had a tremendous offseason, but it's time for a change.
Oh yeah, totally. Like if they miss the playoffs, Conor, are you on board? If they miss the playoffs, he's toast.
I won't believe it until I see it.
Right.
I've said this the whole time. I think that he and Jeff Molson obviously have a very strong working relationship. We don't know what goes on behind closed doors, but he had his implicit trust for this retool. And, I think if I'm Jeff Molson and I'm able to take emotion out of the equation and say, is it Mark's fault that Carey Price didn't perform for the first 2 months of the season? No. Was that the number one reason why things went the way that they did? Yes. The other thing is that I don't even think it comes down to excuses for these guys. And the other thing I hope about Jeff Molson is that he realizes this. Shaun, you just outlined the work that Marc Bergevin has done in the last, let's say, 6-7 months. it's hard really to come up with a lot of really sort of like a bad moves that he's done. And I think that becomes true when you look at the body of work of Bergevin in a lot of ways. I have my issues with some of the moves he's made for sure. The price extension, some of the trades that he's made, but ultimately it's hard to look at very many of them as like, this is a terrible net loss. Like if you're looking at the trades, which is what's the worst trade that he's made? There's not that many, right? We've talked about this. He
some dodgy contracts, but
he wins trades, but he doesn't win games or make the playoffs or win championships. But I think that works in his favor too. And I think the big thing is too for Jeff Molson, who are you replacing him with? Who's the next man up? Is it Joel Bouchard? There's no Dominic Ducharme waiting in the wings in this organization to be the next guy to take over. Is it going to be Pierre Maguire? Is it going to be? I hope not. Is it going to be Patrick Roy?
I'm done.
No, but look, I mean, remember Marc Bergevin? I mean, we didn't really know much about the guy. He was Dale Talon's best friend. He was his understudy in Chicago. I don't know the answer. I have to believe there's a bright young assistant general manager, somebody out there that the organization could look at. I just, what I'm fearful of. I'm fearful of Marc Bergevin becoming the David Poyle of the Montreal market. You don't need a general manager here for 3 bloody decades, man. 1 decade is more than enough. More than enough. And that's why I believe that if it really does go sideways, a part of me does believe that if they make the playoffs, guys, and they lose in the first round, that would be enough to turf them right then and there, because the expectations and this market is bonkers, and they're going to be out for blood.
But that would, what I'm saying is I'm not convinced that would be the right move. The only way is if I know who's going to come in and replace the guy. But it would be very.
I mean, you're not jiving. You don't jive with how Marc Bergevin builds a hockey team. And if Jeff Molson thinks.
Jeff Molson obviously thinks he's done a good job. He had an opportunity when nobody would have questioned it. Was it 3-4 years ago to go in a different direction, and he chose not to do it. So in some ways, I think he's married to Marc Bergevin. I maybe I'm wrong, but I just think we've seen it before. Jeff Molson is not the type of guy to make knee-jerk decisions based on emotion or based on a small sample size. I think he's going to take his time. He's going to evaluate the body of work. He might look at what his options are. And this is all if things go sideways enough for the Canadiens this year that he's in that spot. But I just... like I said off the top, I'll believe it when I see it.
And Conor, I think you raised a really good point. In sports, we have this knee-jerk reaction, fire this guy, get rid of him, we don't want him around. But you have to always ask yourself, well, what's the alternative? If you want to get rid of your quarterback in Dallas, well, who's going to replace Dak Prescott, right? And in this instance here, it's a fair question to ask. Is there someone who's more qualified? Is there a better candidate? As well, we have to acknowledge Bergevin's strength, and that is he's got a great eye for talent. And I've had lunch with Brian Burke on a number of occasions, and unsolicited, he has told me that within the league, behind the scenes, Bergevin is considered to have an elite eye for talent. And he told me this 2 times, 2 separate occasions. I didn't even ask. And you can see it. You can see it by virtue of the players that he has acquired. The argument against him is, well, it hasn't worked out over the 9 seasons and the team hasn't been great developing players, but he's still done a really good job at claiming players or getting players from other teams. So he's better at evaluating talent perhaps on other teams than his own.
Could we say not high-end talent, though? I mean,
right. Yeah.
That's definitely what they're missing.
Hey, sick name drop, Eric, by the way. Sick power lunch.
Yeah.
I got stories there, but I probably shouldn't share them.
That's what the podcast is for.
Yeah.
All right, let's do our top 4 for this week, you guys, as time winds down on yet another episode of the All Draft Podcast. I think that we're now going to be, this will be the longest one we've ever done. Hopefully that's okay. I think we're in the 45th or even 40, if in soccer parlance, the 46th minute right now. Top 4, Tom Cruise movies. Tom Cruise, star of Night and Day, Risky Business, and many other classics. You could even choose one from the 80s, one from the 90s, one from the 2000s, and another one from the 2010s, and still probably have a pretty solid list. I think he's got as good of a repertoire as any star in Hollywood does. That's why I want to hear your top 4 Tom Cruise movies. Shaun, you go first.
This guy is Hollywood royalty. Coming in at number 1, my all-time favorite Tom Cruise film is Jerry Maguire. Number 1. So many memorable quotes. It has such a strong rewatchability. One of my favorite lines in the movie comes from the fictional agent at the end. I love my life. I love my wife. I wish you my kind of success. That has resonated with me. I absolutely love it. I'm going to go old school, a tribute, Color of Money. Not as good as the original. I'm sure we can get into that, but nevertheless, a solid early Tom Cruise film. Let's move to Minority Report, which is a good submission for me because I'm not the biggest sci-fi fan, but again, strong rewatchability. I think it still stands strong today if you pop it in your VCR or Betamax for Eric at home. And fourth on the list, Collateral with Jamie Foxx. Those are my top 4 Tom Cruise movies.
Michael Mann movie, Collateral.
Yes.
Jamie Foxx got an Academy Award nomination. I thought Tom Cruise might have deserved a nomination for that role.
He
I thought
was so good
in that movie.
Yeah, and just by the way, my logic, I wanted to include a Mission Impossible, but it's like a franchise. I didn't know like which one to pick, and so I just decided to avoid that franchise, even though it's as good as I'll take Mission Impossible over Bourne all day, every day.
Bold. Eric?
Well, what didn't make my cut, the top 4, was Tom Cruise's interview with Matt Lauer, although that was as compelling and scintillating interview that we've ever seen. Minority Report was a good movie. Also the name of my employee evaluation for the first 5 years of me working. My top 4 movies, I'll start with number 4, working my way up to number 1. Number 4 for me would be War of the Worlds. I just love that movie. I love the relationship between father and son, which is an ongoing theme in a lot of Spielberg movies. I thought it was just a really good movie.
Robbie's a brat.
Yeah. So I'd say War of the Worlds, number 4. Number 3 would be the Mission Impossible franchise.
Okay.
And so I can't distinguish between any of them, to be honest. But I know when I watched any of these movies, they're fantastic.
Yeah.
You get what you paid for. So great job there for Tom Cruise. Number 2 is Rain Man. I mean, that's an iconic movie starring Dustin Hoffman and Tom Cruise. Love that movie.
How many toothpicks?
Yep. And for me, number 1 is The Last Samurai. I love the scene at the end. I love the scene at the end where he turns to his friend on the field of battle and says, I'll miss our conversations, and then he kills him. So that's my favorite Tom Cruise movie of all time, The Last Samurai.
Wow, the ultimate white savior tale in Japan. Memory serves. I remember I owned that movie on DVD. It's a cool movie for sure. All right, so Shaun, just so I'm clear, your list: Jerry Maguire, Minority Report,
Collateral, Color of Money.
Yeah, and Rain Man.
No, a Minority Report, Collateral, Color of Money, Jerry Maguire.
So. Nobody had Top Gun.
I'm so proud of us. I'm waiting. I didn't want to say it. I was waiting for your list. I was going to give a standing ovation to our Hall of Fame panel for not putting Top Gun in the best of Tom Cruise. Come on.
I saw it in high school, Conor. I saw it so long ago. I don't even remember what the movie was about apart from planes.
It's great. It's a great movie. It's definitely in my top 4. Okay, so I've got Collateral, which we already talked about. Michael Mann, Jamie Foxx. He's a hitman in LA who puts a cab driver in a really difficult position. Top Gun, it's classic. And I had to choose a movie from the 80s. I needed an 80s flick on my Tom Cruise top 4 because he was one of the great actors of the 80s. Mission Impossible Fallout, which was the most recent Mission Impossible, where they do that super high altitude skydive into Paris. He actually filmed those stunts. Solid flick. Loved it. But all the Mission Impossibles are great. Although I will say I rewatched them over the holidays. The first one, the technology causes it to not really stand up as well.
What about the John Woo one?
What's that?
What about the one John Woo directed?
That one was very bad too. That was the second. They got really good with the 3rd, 4th, and 5th. And Edge of Tomorrow. I don't know if you guys haven't seen this movie.
That's a great movie.
Yep. Edge of Tomorrow is in my top 4. Emily Blunt, one of the great badass characters in action movie history. Cruise is a bit more of a jobber, right? He's the one who's got to kind of figure it out and follow along the way. Brendan Gleeson is so good as the general in that movie. Those aliens are terrifying. Loved Edge of Tomorrow. So that's my top 4.
And that's all, to get back to the Mission Impossible for a second. I think it's in today's day and age where you can stay home and watch everything. It's the best compliment I would go see any Mission Impossible in the theater. I will pay like even the IMAX price to go see it in the theater. That's a high compliment to any movie.
Have you ever
also
paid,
yeah.
You ever paid regular price and just gone into the IMAX theater anyway?
That's the actual truth. But
you know what I used to do when I was poor, and this was more recently than I care to admit, but it was I'd go to the machine and buy the Golden Age ticket, and I got caught doing it once too.
No, you got caught. We did it the last time we went to the movie theater.
I was like, oh, my mistake. Sorry.
Yeah. I was super nervous when I handed the guy the ticket. I'm 1 for 1, Connor. 1 for 1.
It is amazing. Isn't it amazing, though, how many great movies he's made since he made Risky Business in 1983. This is someone with tremendous staying power, has worked extremely hard at his craft, and has made so many good movies.
Scientology, baby.
Super weird guy on a number of levels, right? Really into Scientology. Yeah. And I mean, not that we're judging here. If you're a Scientologist and you like the podcast, thank you. And well,
please subscribe.
All right. We'll talk to you in a couple of days. Have a good one, and support the podcast, please. You're supporting it by listening right now, by watching right now. But if you can subscribe or give us a like, or even just comment on the video, every little bit counts. You guys have been great so far. Please help us keep the momentum going, and we hope we can keep delivering a reasonably good podcast day in or week in or every couple of days, I guess it is. So cheers, and we'll talk to you next time.